Welcome to the Praxis Report. We're the podcast where theory meets practice and where politics is dissected through a revolutionary lens. I'm your co host, Jonathan Brown.
And I'm your co-host, William Barth.
Now, today we're going to have a conversation about Robert Kennedy Jr. and his Senate confirmation hearing that took place last week. William and I we have followed Robert Kennedy through his presidential campaign, and now we have been watching the spectacle of this hearing as it exposes, in our opinion, the Democratic Party being captured by the pharmaceutical industry, the big pharma, if you will. So what is your initial thought on these hearings, Will?
John, full disclosure, when you talk about RFK for our generation, particularly my generation, the baby boomer generation, you have to realize the sort of the import of RFK. RFK Sr., Bobby Kennedy, was almost an iconic sort of prophet-like leader of that emerged out of the 1960s civil rights and anti-war
Right.
movements, and he became a sort of a symbol for not only for progressives but for all minority groups as well. He was one of the only politicians in the country who could say walk into a black community, an African American community, and give a speech and not be attacked or killed literally, because at that time it was the era of the long hot summers where African American communities around the country were in flames
Right.
with violence. Some would call it rioting, some called it revolution.
Right.
But Robert Kennedy was one of the few leaders in the country who who had relations with the black community and was considered a sort of a iconic figure even within the black community,
Well, and
and
Kennedy's
also and also an anti-war leader.
right.
The reason why I mentioned him also is RFK Jr. as his son reflects some of those traits. He's the namesake, obviously, of his father, but more importantly, he sort of straddles a similar kind of political idea or direction. I wouldn't call it triangulation the way the Clintons do it, right and left. But Robert Kennedy had an ability to speak to groups on the right and the left. Ironically, many of Robert Kennedy's supporters after Kennedy was assassinated went over and worked for George Wallace, who was a
Yeah.
Southern segregationist. So that's Bobby Kennedy had the ability to attract from the right and the left, from conservatives and liberals. And I think RFK, being in the family business, set a course in his own political work to do the same thing. I didn't mean to get sidetracked with this, but I thought it might
Oh,
be
that's
interesting.
great. I think
Late
it's
leaving.
important. I think it's important. Also, of course, the Kennedys are a pretty much like a royal family, right, for the Democratic Party.
Or the Democratic Party, which makes the Democratic Party's attacks on RFK even more stunning, if you will, or
Right.
astonishing.
Right. But I think you raise a good point that he does appeal to segments of the left and the right. I think he appeals to, on the right, perhaps the libertarian perspective, and on the left,
Correct.
he kind of appeals to a certain of anti-establishment sentiment that is also on the left in regards to distrust of pharmaceutical industry, distrust of big pharma and its lobbying roles over the government. And on the right, he also can appeal to a certain element that is sort of in favor of perhaps privatization or deregulation in some way with the government over certain medical industries.
Right. He talks in the hearings a little bit about the need to take, and this is sort of a right wing, sort of libertarian approach, to take personal responsibility for your health and for
Yes.
health care. So rather than like calling for, as a socialist would, Medicare for all, or Social Security and Medicare for all, universal health care for all. Kennedy says, well, it may, calls more for sort of individual responsibility, like take care of your own health. And we've got to learn to do that because we have we have a major health epidemic in the United States. I'd call it a public health epidemic, but Kennedy would characterize it as just a health epidemic, namely obesity, and these kinds of problems that result from the way we live. We're overweight, we don't exercise, we don't eat healthy foods. So so he sort of personalized it and say, well, we need a system, and it doesn't have to be universal health care, that places more responsibility on the individual. And that is a libertarian, Republican sort of right-wing idea.
Yeah, I think that's something that he definitely does. What do you make of his stance? Because the liberals, the thing that makes them most angry about him, I think, is the fact that they see him as a fringe conspiracy theorist. They kind of attack him as a conspiracy nut. In the hearings, they use the term conspiracy theory to refer to him, and they call him an anti-vaxxer, and frankly, like they claim that he is responsible for killing a lot of people and a lot of death because of opposition to vaccines. What do you think of that? Do you think that those are legitimate
Well,
critiques of RFK?
I do not. I think they're sort of slanders in a way because those critiques are echoing. I mean, I think they clearly echoing the pharmaceutical industry's stance. You're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, that's particularly with regard to vaccination, a
Yeah.
multi-billion-dollar industry. There is so much money involved in this system, and if you look at the open secrets, full disclosure of where corporate pharmaceutical money is going. It historically went more to Republicans to Democrats, but apparently the Democrats have greatly overtaken Republicans. Kamala Harris, apparently, at least from one study that I read in Open Secrets, seemed Kamala Harris took far more money from Big Pharma than did Donald Trump. So they are echoing. So anti-vax. Basically, Kennedy frames it the way any public interest lawyer would. He's basically calling for health and safety regulations of medicines, medical supplies, and medicines. So he's saying some of these vaccinations may not be safe, they're not adequately tested, and they may have side effects and consequences that actually damage the health of people. And so they need to be tested. That's all he's calling for. And for that, he's being crucified. I'll dare you interfere with our multi-billion-dollar vaccination campaign. He's saying, well, we'll play the clip, but basically, the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, was attacking him, saying basically, I'll dare you expose corporate pharmaceutical manufacturers to lawsuits for producing an unsafe product or vaccination. I'll
Right.
dare you. I'll dare. How could you do that? You're going to be killing people if you do that. And it's just obnoxious, actually, the
Right.
Democratic view.
Right. Let me see if we can pull up that clip from Elizabeth Warren. Okay, so here's the clip of Elizabeth Warren grilling Kennedy in the hearing.
You could publish your anti-vaccine conspiracies, but this time on U.S. government letterhead, something a jury might be impressed by. You could appoint a CDC vaccine panel who share your anti-vax views and let them do your dirty work. You could tell the CDC vaccine panel to remove a particular vaccine from the vaccine schedule. You could remove vaccines from special compensation programs, which would open up manufacturers to mass torts.
There it is.
Injuries eligible for compensation, even if there is no causal evidence. You could change vaccine court processes to make it easier to bring junk lawsuits. You could turn over FDA data to your friends at the law firm, and they could use it however it benefited them. You could change vaccine labeling. You could change vaccine information rules. You could change which claims are compensated in the vaccine injury compensation program. There's a lot of ways that you can influence those future lawsuits and pending lawsuits while you are Secretary of
There it
Energy.
is, right there.
I'm asking you to commit right now that you will not take a financial stake in every one of those lawsuits so that what you do as secretary will also benefit you financially down the line.
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not the question. You and I, you have said.
You're asking me, Senator, you're asking me not to sue a vaccine company. Yeah, you are. That's exactly what you're doing.
No, look, no one should be fooled here. As Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy will have the power to undercut vaccines and vaccine manufacturing across our country. And for all of his talk about follow the science and his promise that he won't interfere with those of us who want to vaccinate his kids, the bottom line is the same. Kennedy can kill off access to vaccines and make millions of dollars while he does it.
There you go. There you go. So here's this public interest lawyer who's now just a greedy son of a gun because he sues major corporations,
Right.
and he doesn't let corporations do whatever they want to do. This same argument is used against the nuclear power industry. Yeah, in other words, the argument that nuclear manufacturers of nuclear energy plants should be exempt from lawsuits because a nuclear accident, I mean, think of the damage that a nuclear accident would cause, tens of trillions of dollars worth of damages. So if they were actually responsible for the damage that they caused, you would put the whole industry out of business.
Right.
And so that the same exact argument is being used here. And the same argument was used again, as we discussed earlier. Me and you were talking off before we started the podcast. The same argument was used against Ralph Nader. So they're profiling Kennedy, this, a son of the Kennedy who's already, wealthy, as just being some greedy lawyer who's trying to sue corporations and make money off lawsuits. Lining his pocket.
Yeah, and this is the argument, and you bring up Ralph Nader because Ralph Nader is also a guy that he rose to fame as a public interest defender of consumers from automobile industry. He wrote a book in the 60s called Unsafe at Any Speed that was a critique of the automobile industry and the fact that cars are manufactured in a very dangerous way with very lax government oversight. But the thing that really liberals hate Kennedy for and will never forgive him for is that he ran as a Green Party candidate in 2000. And
Nader.
Yeah, Nader. Sorry, Nader. Yeah,
right.
Nader,
right.
And they believe Nader cost the election to Al Gore. So for that, Nader is forever the enemy of all liberal Democrats. But
yeah, because liberal Democrats oppose a multi-party democracy. They don't believe in democracy. There should be only one or two parties ruling. There should not be multiple political parties. They don't agree with it. They attack it. They sue it. It's disgusting and obnoxious. If you're a liberal Democrats should be just ashamed of themselves. Ashamed.
I think the video we just watched of Elizabeth Warren, in my opinion, she came across very negatively in that interview. She came across, frankly, as almost hysterical and not even. And I think that's a common thing I saw in all the videos I've watched. The senators don't even give RFK a chance barely to respond. They shout over him. They yell at him. They call him names like accusing him of being a greedy lawyer who's going to profit from suing these poor pharmaceutical companies and call him a crazy fringe conspiracy nut, all these things to sort of discredit him and delegitimize him. And this is kind of part of a thing I've noticed in recent years, which is that a lot of liberals since COVID have switched from being critics of big pharma and big tech to being the staunchest defenders of big pharmaceutical companies and big tech corporations, which they believe basically that all of your rights to participate in public life should be contingent upon you consenting to receive the COVID vaccination. If you did not do that, then you shouldn't be allowed to have your job. You should not be allowed to leave your house. I believe even Noam Chomsky said something about if you didn't get a vaccine, you should be locked in your house and can't leave. Something like that. Don't go out into public. So it's sort of, not that I disagree with the fact that COVID was a real thing and all of that. But I think their approach to COVID is one that institutionalizes corporate power and the state and corporations combining together to criminalize people in the population who refuse to go along with it. And in that regards, I do sympathize with Kennedy's position here.
Yeah, that's it's really well stated, John. But I think for us, I mean, our job is to try to theorize this question a little bit, even deeper, unpack it even deeper. Again, it seems that the tension here is between what we consider to be public health and public health policy on the one hand, and a public healthcare system on the one hand, and then this sort of libertarian idea that you're responsible for your own health. You should decide for yourself whether you want to take a vax or not. You should have access to vaccination or not. You should not close down businesses because of COVID. If someone wants to walk into a crowded business, that's an individual decision. The state should not be used in a manner that enforces the public health. So you have this tension between this sort of libertarian approach on the one hand and this public health approach on the other. And then you have a third question, which is what is the role that these major corporations are playing, and do these corporations have undue influence over the health and safety of the American people? Look, just this weekend, I mean, we have now planes falling out of the sky because the FAA may not be, up to snuff, regulating the airways where planes are flying. We had 2 major air accidents already over the weekend. So this is a problem throughout the whole government. And again, Kennedy reflects both strands. He challenges corporate capture of our federal government, not just in vaccines. And, Kennedy's career was as an environmental defense lawyer. So he was basically a lawyer who sued corporations for polluting our oceans and rivers. So that's his background. The medicine thing was something he got into later. And it's the same kind of issue. Basically, he's questioning the health and safety of medicines from these manufacturers of big pharma manufacturers, Pfizer and these other companies are multi-billion-dollar companies.
Well, I think a big issue with this is that if you look at like Gallup public opinion polls of Americans, there is a widespread distrust in the pharmaceutical industry and these healthcare industries, medical corporations. And I think that vaccine skepticism is a part of that. And when it came to COVID, I think the American government tried to do it both ways, where on the one hand, we tried to treat it like, yeah, this is a public health crisis, but on the other hand, we left it up to the individual and said, you can choose to get a vaccine or not. You can choose to socially distance or not. You can choose to wear a mask or not. And so it led it to become a culture war issue where people who believed in libertarianism were like, no, I have the personal freedom. And then people who were liberal would say, no, well, you're being a bad person if you walk out of your house without a mask or a vaccine. The way that they handled it in the People's Republic of China was they actually treated it as a real public health issue. And their goal was to eradicate COVID through COVID zero policy, where they would track and trace outbreaks of the disease, isolate and quarantine people until the disease was defeated. And in the process, they actually didn't have to rely on mass vaccinations or causing people to hate each other over their vaccination status, because China prioritizes social stability over division like we have in America. And I think that's a big part of the problem. We treat things like liberals are not treating things. They either need to go full into public health or just reject it, because what they're doing right now is trying to claim they're defending public health, but in reality they're using the pharmaceutical industry, these giant corporations, and saying trust these companies, trust these manufacturers, that they're safe and that they're good. And I think that's where the skepticism that RFK speaks of comes in.
Right. And because as a practical matter, we do not have a public health system. That's a false notion. The United States of America does not have a public health system at all. It is just simply a privatized arena of private hospitals, drug manufacturers, doctors in private practice. There are HMOs and so forth, like Kaiser and others. But basically, it's a privatized system completely. There's no such thing as a public health system. We don't have a national health service like Great Britain does. And so one of the major problems of COVID was there is no public health system. If you have COVID, and you're one of the, what is it, 27 million uninsured Americans who has no health insurance, what do? I mean, you don't have a doctor. You walk into a hospital and you'll be charged what, $50,000, $100,000 because you walked into an emergency room to get treated.
Right.
So whereas China, like you talk about China, they really geared up because they have a federal or national health system, and they actually geared up. I think they really beefed up their healthcare providers to develop what do they call it? The doctors who specialize in these diseases like COVID. It's an actual medical specialty. I'm thinking it's toxicology or something like that.
Yeah.
So they really beefed up the doctors who specialize in these treatments of which you'd call, oh, I know, infectious disease doctors.
Yes.
So, and I think infectious disease not only covers COVID, but a whole range of infectious diseases, AIDS or cancer and all these kind of, diseases. So they beefed up their medical providers to have more providers to treat these kinds of diseases and also educate the public on how to take steps to eradicate infectious disease. That's what a public healthcare system does. We don't have one.
Right.
And as a result, Kennedy often talks about the fact that we had more deaths from COVID than any other country in the world.
Right.
And Kennedy's right. We're an unhealthy country. We're probably one of the most unhealthy countries. And the number of COVID deaths, it was directly correlated with the unhealth of Americans. I mean, being overweight, obesity and other, those are the people who, often were fatally, fatalities resulted from their infections.
Well, and it's a problem, and I was really critical of the way that the government handled it, because if you were going to have people stay home and socially distance, then they should have nationalized people's wages and start providing resources, providing universal health care, providing the resources for people to do that.
And what do the businesses do who can't remain in business because they have to shut their doors? How do they remain in business? How do they retain employees? And so forth.
Well, this is comparing it to something in history when we had when FDR was president during World War II, the U.S. government essentially nationalized the economy. They took over majority of the industry in the country was taken over by the U.S. government. And like if you were a company that manufactured cars, they would say, no, now you're going to be manufacturing tanks for the war effort. So the entire economy, every industry was mobilized through the federal government for defeating the threat of the Nazis. And if we really were serious that COVID was this global threat, this pandemic, why didn't we mobilize the country in that way? And then I think people would find, more trust in their society, in their medical system, if we actually had a real working public health system, as opposed to this neoliberal patchwork of individual efforts versus big corporate tyranny, which nobody wins in that situation.
Right. And I think nobody represents the existing privatized system of major private corporations like pharmaceutical companies, big pharma, private hospitals, and the sort of privatized market-based healthcare, commodified healthcare industry than the liberal Democrat. And what you saw Warren doing there was saying, my God, we need to protect our corporations. You mean you're going to Mr. Kennedy's going to allow lawsuits against major manufacturers of vaccines like Pfizer if they produce a vaccine that's unsafe and starts killing people and giving them all sorts of side effects that'll ruin their lives.
Yeah.
We got to protect these poor
Won't
manufacturers who are
somebody
making
please think
billions
of
of
the
dollars.
poor, please think of the poor pharmaceutical companies. Somebody, please. Who's looking
And
out for them?
also now we're not going to have it's going to discourage these mega corporations from producing more vaccines and more vaccines. And this goes to a larger debate about healthcare, which is should we not being relying so much on corporate medicines and instead take care of ourselves better, eat better, exercise, things like that.
Well, that's a good point. Here's another clip that RFK sort of discusses that same topic. This is the clip that is also pretty famous right now, where is getting he's getting grilled by Bernie Sanders. So let's pull
Oh.
the Bernie Sanders clip.
This is the Bernie Sanders that supported the Biden healthcare plan, which is to veto universal Medicare, right? Is that Bernie Sanders is an opponent of universal healthcare? Is that right, or am I wrong about that?
No,
Well, he
that's
says he supports it, but he backed Biden, who threatens to veto universal healthcare. Is
right.
that his? Is that who he is? I
That's
just want to know who's the real Bernie Sanders here.
yeah.
Well, maybe he can explain that.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us. I very much like the slogan that you coined, "Make America Healthy Again." And I strongly agree with that effort. Despite spending, as you indicated, 2 or 3 times as much per capita on healthcare as other nations, we have 85 million people who are uninsured, underinsured. We have all kinds of chronic illnesses. Our life expectancy is lower than other countries. And for working class people in this country, they're living 6, 7 years shorter lives than the top 1%. We got a problem, okay? And I'm gonna suggest some ideas that I think can remedy that. Last year, the insurance industry in this country made over $70 billion, while at the same time, 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. Do you agree with me that the United States should join every other major country on earth and guarantee health care to all people as a human right? Yes, no?
Senator, I can't give you a yes or no answer to that question.
Healthcare a human right? Is healthcare a human right?
In the way that free speech is a human right,
Yeah.
I would say it's different, because if with free speech doesn't cost anybody anything, but in healthcare, if you smoke cigarettes for 20 years and you get cancer, you are now taking from the pool. And so are you guaranteed the same right?
I'm sorry.
My initial thought, there's a few things. The first point is Bernie Sanders. So, obviously we agree with Bernie Sanders that we need universal health care, and that it's a travesty that millions of Americans don't have health insurance. But I find Bernie's behavior very troubling, because he's grilling Robert Kennedy over universal health care, while Bernie campaigned in support of Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and
Right.
Kamala Harris. All 3 of them oppose universal.
Opposed it.
So we never saw Bernie Sanders attacking Kamala Harris over
No.
healthcare. We never saw him attacking Joe Biden over healthcare.
Such a good point.
So where was the Bernie Sanders? He was completely silent, but suddenly when Trump gets into office, now Bernie's going to come out and start protesting about healthcare. It just makes him seem like a complete hypocrite.
Exactly. I can't add anything to that. It's unbelievable.
But the other thing I wanted to talk about with this clip is I think I disagree with RFK's position here, because RFK says healthcare is not a human right like freedom of speech, because
Right.
he argues that freedom of speech doesn't cost any money. And I think he's trying to do something that a lot of libertarians do. There's this distinction between what they call negative liberty and positive liberty. That's something that, in political philosophy. And I think the idea is that something that is like, do not infringe upon me, like, don't take away my free speech, don't take away my right to life, don't take away my right to liberty or something, right to property. Those are so called negative rights. On the other hand, there are things that are positive rights, like the right to healthcare, the right to a job, the right to a clean drinking water, the right to food, the right to housing. So libertarians reject what they call as positive rights because they believe it costs money to provide healthcare and housing and jobs and food and water to people. But I would say to that I think he's wrong that healthcare, I mean that free speech doesn't cost anything. In order to have the right to freedom of speech, you still have to have public airwaves. You have to have a means at which to express yourself. And if someone attempts to silence you, it requires the courts, the state, the police, the government, the legal system to devote its resources to defending the rights of the citizens to speak. So I think this distinction between healthcare costs money, but free speech doesn't, I think he's wrong about that. I think both rights require the positive action of the state to enforce them.
Yeah,
But
well stated. Well
I don't know,
stated.
you're a lawyer. What is
Well,
on that?
I would not contradict anything you just stated. I think you framed it very eloquently again. I would just add to that. This is part of a larger debate in human rights, international human rights. This has always been a larger part of a larger debate. We have accepted here in the United States the notion of human rights as it applies to political rights, civil rights, the right to free speech, the right to a trial, the right to have free elections. Those are political and civil rights. We've accepted that as a fundamental part of human rights, and we've actually ratified the international treaty on that subject called the International Covenant on, I believe it's civil and political rights. However, internationally, there's another aspect to human rights, and that is social, cultural, and something we call economic rights. Those would be the things like economic rights would include things like healthcare, housing, education, and food. And the idea is, should those areas be sort of areas that are not subject to the whims of the marketplace. I think Carl Polanyi calls the market a satanic mill, because if housing is unaffordable and education is unaffordable and food is unaffordable and healthcare only belongs to the rich who can afford to pay to see a doctor, that is a violation of human dignity, and that those areas should be protected by human rights as well. Now, there is an international covenant also on social, cultural, and economic rights, which the United States has not ratified and never ratified. Most countries have, however, around the world. So the United States has not joined the civilized world in that respect, and is still a rogue nation. And you hear arguments like Kennedy is making, which I think you've analyzed it and criticized it very well. I also disagree with Kennedy in that regard. And however, he makes a good point about the need to take better care of ourselves, because even a publicly sponsored federal national health system or a national health service would require that people take better care of themselves, that they eat right, that they exercise, and that they take, not only responsibility, but you have sort of a public health campaign to encourage people to do this, meaning businesses get involved and civic organizations get involved. And, people don't have to run marathons like I do, but, maybe we should promote marathon, training more. I don't know.
I agree.
I
agree. I think, so that was the second half of his comments where he said, like, Bernie kind of, this is the other thing. Bernie was interrupting him and cutting him off. But he was going on to, RFK was saying that if someone smoked cigarettes for 20 years, should they be given the same healthcare rights as someone who's healthy and doing
That's right.
choices.
And
And
you heard that a lot in the COVID debate. Should someone who didn't take the vax, should we treat them in a hospital because they refused to get vaccinated? So now
right,
they're sick and they're dying. And should we
right.
spend our money taking care of them?
I mean, I don't disagree with him entirely that obviously people should make healthy choices in their lifestyle. But I think that it's not simply as easy as to just say we individualize the problem and say, oh, you've made a unhealthy choice, therefore you do not have the right to health
Right.
insurance. I
Yeah,
think
then you've privatized it and
we privatize.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Terrible.
a true
Terrible.
public health approach would, as you say, it would not just be everyone has the right to health care, but it would also include the promotion in our culture of healthy eating, healthy exercise, healthy lifestyles, so that that would be a part of everyone's life. I mean, a big reason people smoke or people eat unhealthy or don't exercise is, you know, they talk about food deserts. Like there are a lot of areas in America where there are no healthy food options available. The only thing you
Right.
have around is,
Local
McDonald's,
local McDonald's.
local
Yeah.
McDonald's. So can you blame the individual? Can you privatize the problem and blame the individual for eating unhealthy when they have no option? And even if they could, they couldn't afford to buy the healthy food. So I think that is a bigger question that RFK he wasn't really addressing, I don't think.
No, and but you're right. And anyway, but the debate exposes all of these elements, and I think hopefully we've shed some light on it. I just wanted to mention how the Democrats' conduct here. You always talk about the Democrats attacking Donald Trump because he's a fascist. I mean, what are the Democrats acting like here? What are liberals acting like? I mean, they literally like, what are they, liberal neo-fascists? I mean, they're cutting off debate, they're cutting off discussion, they're cutting off deliberation on some of the most important health decisions we confront, the things you and I are talking about, how we eat, how we exercise, what kind of medicine we take, what kind of medicines should we be taking, should we be pro-vax, anti-vax? All of these questions are so important. They deserve so much discussion and public education. And the way that liberals and the Democrats said we will have no discussion on any of these questions, we will do the bidding of big pharma. And don't you dare challenge our vaccinations and our medicines and make us test our medicines to make sure they're safe. You will not question the safety of our medicine. You will take it. I mean, that is fascistic. I just think it's despicable.
It's absolutely horrible. There is no free debate, but I think that the Democrats and the liberals and the left have taken this position that they can't even have a reasonable discussion. I mean, there's a sort of decline in the idea of open discussion and free speech on the
And
left.
civility and everything else,
Absolutely.
decorum and civility and everything else.
Absolutely. But if they're from their point of view, if RFK and Trump and Tulsi Gabbard and all these people are just a bunch of fascist Nazis, then why should they even let them talk?
Right, let's just cut them off. And by the way, the I think the attacks also on RFK, reminiscent of some of the attacks that Ralph Nader used to suffer. Very, very. You'll notice how they smear him with individual attacks on his individual person. What did the attack of his cousin that he put live chickens in a blender, grinding them up a lot. I mean, that does sound pretty dastardly and pathologically sick, but that's the kind of attack that they're making.
Right.
I mean, everybody has personal individual issues and problems in their lives. I mean, RFK obviously had this addiction. He was addicted to medicines, drugs and so forth.
Right.
So he had his personal battles, but the way they attacked him for it personally was also, I think, despicable.
Well, I think this whole situation reveals that we don't have the Democratic Party is not committed to defending the health of the people. They're not committed to defending universal health care, even if Bernie claims that that's his signature issue. I think they sort of expose their hypocrisy that they are actually committed to defending the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And
Correct.
as much as I disagree with RFK on his kind of libertarian,
Libertarian view, yes.
individualistic privatization model, I think if the Democrats have killed universal health care, then all we have left now is RFK and his approach.
What did we say last podcast? The only show in town.
Right. RFK becomes the only show in town because the
Right.
Democrats have become
Because the Democrats have not offered a truly opposition remedy, which would be universal health care and a true public health system that challenged the big corporations' control of the system.
And one last thing we should add, this is not a new debate. When FDR was president back in the 30s and 40s, he famously gave a speech. He called for the second Bill of Rights that would have included what he would have called an economic Bill of Rights that would have been housing, healthcare, public health, social security. And that was more, what, 70, 80 years ago? And that has still not been implemented. In socialist countries, there's a better track record in respecting economic rights. In the 1936 Constitution of the Soviet Union under Stalin, they implemented all sorts of rights that we don't have in America, like the right to health care, the right to a job, the right to housing,
Right.
the right to education, the right to
Right.
maternity leave. Those were things that back in the 30s they got in Russia. But still in the United States, we have privatized the problem of public health. We have privatized it. We refuse to treat it as a public issue. And as a result, this is what we see today.
Right. And also, John, all throughout Western Europe, social democracies, Sweden, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, the UK, where we have a national health service, wonderful, very well, very well. In the UK, it's like a third rail. You cannot attack the National Health Service. Uh, Canada has a universal health insurance system. So it's
America is the outlier.
yeah, America is really is a rogue state in this regard. And again, international human rights, most civilized countries do ratify the idea that these rights, social, cultural, and economic rights, are a part of fundamental human rights, what we call the protection of or the promotion of human dignity. Dignity is a big aspect of human rights jurisprudence, you might say.
Right.
So most of the world do promote and protect these things. The United States doesn't, and that's what a true opposition Democratic Party should be doing, but they don't.
I think that's a great note to end on.
I think we've unpacked the issues well today. Hopefully, John, you and I, with my whatever small contribution I could make, we shed some light on this terrible debate, the way Kennedy was attacked in this vicious way. Hopefully, we unpacked it and helped people understand the issue and offered some suggestion on what we can do about it. And we'll continue to do that in future podcasts. So we want to tell everyone, please press your like button. That helps our algorithms on the Praxis report. We want to help our algorithms to spread our message and get everyone involved who's viewing the Praxis report. We want to expand it as much. We don't want to privatize it. We want to make it public, public forum. And also join the, what is it called, John? The
Patreon. Join us.
Patreon.
Yep.
So join that. And thank you. And we'll see you soon at the next podcast.
All right. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.
Peace.